Right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest discussion in the Talking About Socialism series. It's great to have you all here tonight. This meeting, by the way, is being recorded and live streamed to Facebook, so there will be a recording of the meeting available afterwards. Just some housekeeping before I introduce the topic of the meeting tonight and we get started. I'm going to be chairing the meeting tonight. If you haven't been to one of these discussion meetings before, welcome. It's great to have you here. The way we have these discussions is that we have a topic introduced by a speaker for about 15 minutes at the start, and then we give everyone a chance to come in with their own contributions. Those can be thoughts on what's been said, your own ideas or questions for the speaker who's introduced, whatever you like. All we ask, and we are strict about it, is that you keep it to 3 minutes, and it'll be my job to cut you off the minute that you go past that. All right. So the way that you come in and contribute is by raising your virtual hand on Zoom. Hopefully you all know how to do that. If for any reason you can't do that, do your best to raise your physical hand on the camera. I'll be keeping a lookout, and hopefully I'll see you and I'll get you on the list, and I'll tell everybody in the order in which they're going to come in periodically. Some other housekeeping, some apologies have been sent for tonight's meeting from Chris Strafford and Kat Rylance. So sorry that they couldn't be here tonight. In terms of these meetings now, they've been going on for around 6 months. They've been organised by a small group of comrades, most of whom are on this meeting tonight. It includes me, Nick Wrack, who's going to be introducing the meeting tonight, Will, Gary, and Soraya Lawrence as well. The link to the statement that forms the basis of tonight's discussion has been posted in the chat already, but I'm just going to post it there again. Nick's beating me to it. So it's now it's live on the About page of the Talking About Socialism website, which is at talkingaboutSocialism.org/about, and it's headed Who We Are and the Ideas That Guide Us. So this statement of principles has been put together by the organising group of these discussions after quite a bit of debate and discussion among the group, and we're very pleased to present it now to the world and to you all here tonight. And we feel it represents a high quality finished product, if you like, and even if the people here tonight in the course of the discussion disagree or have different emphases on this or that point in the statement, if you accept it as a basis for working together with us and collaborating with us on these discussion sessions, and of course for future action as well, then we welcome your involvement on the basis of accepting that statement. So the discussion will be introduced tonight by Nick Wrack, who's on the call. He's going to speak for around 15 minutes. Well, I'm going to be strict and hold him to 15 minutes exactly. And after that, everyone will get a chance to speak. If it's your first time, please feel free to contribute. All contributions are welcome. And I will make sure that everybody on the call gets an opportunity to speak and that we hear from everybody. So I'm going to hand over now to Nick. 15 minutes. The floor is yours, Nick.
Thank you very much, Ed. Welcome, everybody. Thanks very much for coming. I hope you all, or at least most of you, have had an opportunity to read the statement, which I'm going to introduce. I don't have time to go through it in detail, but I'm going to do some broad points and just reiterate some of the comments that Ed's made in his introductory remarks. First of all, those of us that have organized these meetings are all committed Marxists. We call ourselves socialists or communists. Some of us prefer one word, some of us prefer another. But I think for those of us that have organized these meetings, we use the terms to mean the same thing. And that is, we mean a society that develops in the future after the working class has come to power, after we have expropriated the capitalist class taken the means of production into state hands, but that state is a completely different type of state with working class democracy. And that over a period of time, and there may be disagreements on how long. My own view is that it would be rather short. Others think that it might be longer. The state itself would wither away, and what we would be left with is the administration of things and the organization of production, rather than a state that is repressive or enforcing or governing people. So that's socialism or communism as we understand it. And that's what our aim is. And we believe that it's necessary to promulgate those ideas and that aspiration, and if you like, that vision of a new society in which there is no ruling class, there are no bosses, there's no people telling us what to do, how to do it. We take those decisions collectively. There's no state, as I've said, there's no borders. And we have a world in which everybody is able to develop their talents and their abilities to their fullest extent. We believe that that is a vision of a society that would appeal to most people in the place of their daily drudgery, tiredness, stress, the way that even those who are fortunate enough to have a job or live in relatively wealthy societies are forced to wear themselves to the bone, trying to make ends meet, not able to pay the bills, not able to spend time with their families, bring up their children, devote enough time to their children and their grandchildren and so on. A completely different society, which would be a society of abundance for all, and a society in which we'd be able to devote time to do the things that we want. We'd be able to participate in the running of society, which most people are deprived of. We'd be able to develop aspects of our personality that perhaps at the moment we can't. And so that's the vision, if you like. That's the ultimate goal, which should motivate us, and we should put to society in general, and particularly to the working class. Because as Marxists, we, like Marx and Engels and those who followed him, identify the working class, the class that has nothing, as the class that can bring about that change. Compared with when Marx and Engels wrote in the 19th century, the grave diggers of capitalism, as they were called in the Communist Manifesto, they have grown in size and in strength. In most countries in the world today, the working class is an absolute majority. And certainly on an international field, the working class is the overwhelming majority of humanity. The working class has the potential to change the society in which we live. The working class has the power, if it understood its ability, if it understood its power and its position, it could change society at the click of fingers. So how do we get from the present situation where relatively few agree with our vision, and relatively few, even if they agree with it, think that it's achievable? How do we get from here to that position where the working class, that mighty force in society, uses that force to bring about that change? And the first thing is to acknowledge that our ideas, the ideas of Marxism, of socialism or communism, have been pushed back. They've been pushed back internationally. They've been pushed back in Britain. If you look at the rest of the world, the ideas of being pushed back into the crevices and so on. At the same time, there is, in my opinion, and I think we share this, a real interest in Marxist ideas. And there's discussion about how we confront the problems and what are the ideas that we need and what are the methods of organization that we need to adopt to confront the conditions of the working class. We recognize that both the terms socialism and communism have been distorted and misrepresented by those who claim it's the mantle or those names. Socialists today, the term covers a vast array of ideas from parties in certain parts of the world that aren't in any way socialist at all. In no sense can they be described as socialist. To the social democratic parties that still call themselves democratic socialists, but of course don't share that vision that I've outlined at the beginning of my talk, and aren't really, we do not think, socialists at all. The word communism, again, has been distorted and perverted by the pernicious trend or strand of Stalinism, which has been an absolute stick with which to beat those of us who are Marxists. The perverted regimes of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc have nothing in common with the ideas of Marx and Engels. Russia today is a capitalist country, nothing to do with Marx, although some people on the left still seem to see it as some sort of continuation. And we have China, which is looked on as a socialist country. It's led by the Chinese Communist Party, and certainly for my part, I don't see the Chinese Communist Party as being in any way, shape or form communist. In my opinion, China is a capitalist society. That's not something that we've put in the statement, and there may even be disagreements amongst the six of us on that point. But what we want to do is to go back to the ideas of Marx, the ideas of Engels, in the genuine format that they were developed, and try to apply them as they pertain to the modern world with the advance of science, of technology, of production, of the internationalization of trade and production, where the whole of the globe is interlinked, and you cannot see a solution to the problems that we face on a national scale at all. That was the position of Marx, that was the position of Lenin, and even more today, it should be the position of those who call themselves socialists and communists. There is no national road to socialism, so we have to have an international outlook. Those crises, if you look at them, economic, social, political, with the retreat even of bourgeois democracy, its erosion, its disappearance, the coming to power of popular right-wing demagogues, undermining even the limited advances of bourgeois democracy. At the same time, we have a climate catastrophe, which we believe can only be properly confronted and dealt with by changing the mode of production, changing the way that society is organized, so that the majority of people on the planet can actually organize production to ensure that the planet, that nature of which we are part and upon which we depend, is not destroyed, ruining vast swathes of life, of humanity, and potentially destroying humanity altogether at some stage in the not too distant future. So that's the basis for our statement. And that's, I hope, the background for us coming together, because we, as a small group of comrades who come from different backgrounds, different Marxist traditions see the need and have seen the need to try to draw together those who share those ideas. Now, we recognize that there are other Marxist organizations out there, and we want to work with them, although we've got criticisms and differences. We don't see that we, as a group of half a dozen or even 100 or 200 or several thousand, can bring about that change. We want unity of socialists and communists. We want to build a mass socialist stroke communist party. The ideas, therefore, need to be taken to every single corner of the working class, into the trade union movement, into the streets, the housing estates, the colleges, schools, and so on. And to do that, we need allies. And that's what our statement is about. Tonight, we're making a pitch to you to join us in our attempt to build the ideas that we outline in the statement. It's not completely comprehensive. It doesn't deal with everything. It's not actually a party program. It's not a what we stand for. It's trying to outline what we think are the basic principles around which Marxists, socialists, communists can work and can work together in the same organization. There will be other areas that we need to discuss. There will be differences, there will be disagreements. One area perhaps where we have disagreed with organizations of which we've been a part and which continue to do good work in Britain and elsewhere is the lack of democracy and the lack of an ability to raise differences and disagreements in an open, comradely way. We hope those of you who have participated in these meetings will see, at least we've tried to create an atmosphere of comradely discussion, dissent, disagreement, and we want to continue to build that trust. We believe that the most important task that we as Marxists have at the present moment is to help to build a new party of the working class based on the ideas of socialism, communism. And so we want to draw you together with us in that work, in that task. On that journey to doing that, there will be disagreements, areas of discussion, which we can thrash out, discuss, and debate. We will work with others on the left, other Marxists, other communists with whom we may have some disagreements. For my part, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, I would like to see all Marxists, all socialists, all communists who share that ultimate goal in the same party. The stronger, the bigger, the better, the more clout we have, a party that learns lessons, a party that draws in working class trade union militants and activists, bringing their experiences to share with one another. That's the task that we're setting ourselves. It may seem ambitious, but we have to be. We have a world to win. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Came in 15 seconds to spare, for which I'm most grateful. So now the floor is open. As I say, contributions, 3 minutes. That's to ensure that everyone gets a chance to speak. And then once everyone's been heard, then we can have another go round. And of course, there will be time at the end for Nick to come back and respond to some of the points and questions that have been raised. So if I can see some hands from comrades who'd like to come in and make a contribution, then I will start calling you in. And once you hit 3 minutes, as I say, I'll cut you off, but don't worry, there will undoubtedly be time after for you to come in and make another contribution once we've been through everybody. So if I can have contributions from the floor, please. I'm going to call in Will first of all.
Hi. Oh, well, Matthew, maybe Matthew first.
Yeah, okay, I'll take Matthew and then Will.
Thanks, Will. Okay, no, there's a few things I think really, I mean, under the current circumstances, thanks to Nick for the introduction, but I think there's a few issues really on, in terms of the current situation in order to attempt to understand where we're at. I mean, briefly, I think the first thing really is the nature of capitalism as a system in decline, which is obviously is something that is basically within Marx, but also particularly developed by Trotsky and others. That actually the whole basis of the function of the system is going down the tube, and the decay of things like the law of value and so on and so forth is ongoing, and the system itself is in that position of decay, which is, I mean, is that clearly can be seen in the nature of the society. It's obvious if you could understand it in that way. The second thing I think really that's really important in terms of understanding the current situation is the move of capitalism itself to finance capital, which actually something they started in the early 70s, and this is the importance of the Thatcher Reagan thing, was actually to move away from industrial capital to finance capital, which then, as part of that, then removes the capitalists from actually directly confronting the working class in many ways, makes the whole system itself, accelerates the decline of the system, makes capitalism itself both more parasitic, more criminal, but also more strategic. It allows, obviously, for the fact that finance capital is not tied to particular areas of production or whatever else, means it can be more strategic, and particularly in terms of its control and maneuvers against the working class. And that allows to understand the current situation. I think the third thing, and I mean there's a few of these, I'll do some before, because also I'm going to get cut off. I think the third really important question here is the issue of Stalinism and the impact of Stalinism. And Nick obviously said things about the Chinese Communist Party, but I think that also we have to understand Stalinism as a tendency and something which has actually managed to dominate the workers' movement, which actually over a whole period, over the period of the latter part of the 20th century and even into the 21st century, has stabilized capitalism. I mean, in 1945, there is no way, that revolutions in France, Italy, Greece, etc., would have been avoided, other than for the fact that Stalinists actually stabilized the system, were able to control the workers' movement, able actually in many ways, to kill the leaders of, if you look at, say, Vietnam, when the Vietnamese Trotskyists were just slaughtered, those people who stood out to the left of Stalinists were just killed, and we can see that, as a method. You can also point to the fact that actually it's the Chinese Communist Party after 2008 that restabilizes capitalism, has the biggest building, lays down more concrete than has ever been known in human history, has the biggest building program in history, and in that way holds up and reflates the whole bloody system.
I'm gonna cut you off there, Matthew.
But I think that's vital to understanding where we're at.
Thanks very much, Matthew. I think yeah. I mean, it's an important point, isn't it? The ways in which countries which claim the name socialist or communist have functioned as part of the global economy and what role they play today. It's a really important point for discussion. I'm going to bring Will in next, and if comrades can raise their virtual hands.
Yeah, so sorry about that, Matthew. I thought because I was a signatory, I'd let you go first. What I like about the statement actually is that we've stripped it actually down to the essentials, what we think the essential project is around class politics, democracy, the need to replace a capitalist state with, in my view anyway, a worker state that would then fade away over time, discuss. And I think we spent quite a long time getting to the bare essentials to do that. And also our desire to collaborate and work with other Marxists and socialists. I think that Kirsty Lowe in the chat says we should be doing this. Let's look at the new Labour Party cabinet. It's full of righties. The question of how to build a mass socialist party of the working class is put before us once again, in particular by Keir Starmer. And I think that he and what we're going to see from the Labour Party, if they win the election, is going to be somewhat nightmarish. And I think this kind of makes the task that we've got really essential, because the one thing the Starmerites and the people who are backing him, and I don't know whether you saw in the newspaper today, but more millionaires are giving money to Labour now than to the Tories. Yeah, the idea is to finish off the welfare state in any form of collectivism and to unpack a neoliberal war-fighting British state that's going to try and find its place in the world. And this is a really, really dangerous perspective. It will destroy the Labour Party. You can see it happening before your eyes. So we do need to have this discussion. I, for one, am quite happy to call myself a communist, but I think I prefer the term socialist because I think it has the possibility of engaging with far more many people, because the opposition to us, who are certainly not communists or socialists, will use it and distort it and reframe it. And I think that we have to really fight for the word socialism. And I think it's good, as Minnie was pointing out, that there's, socialism is trending on Twitter. This is all good stuff. And I think I think we have to fight for that term. I think finally, the final thing I want to say is that I think sometimes you could, because I've been doing this for about 40 years, and I seem to remember the WRP in particular said we were going to have a final crisis of capitalism just around the corner in the 1970s and the 1980s. And, there is this kind of impulsion in those kind of politics to say there is a final crisis coming. But to a degree, I think what's happening, what capital is doing to the environment and to nature, and I include us in nature, is producing a crisis of phenomenal depths. And we're going to have a mass working class response to it, because if we don't, then the working class will end up paying the price, and the ruling class will find any way it can to survive at the expense of the working class on a planet which is in severe trouble.
Thanks very much, Will. I've got Anita's hand raised next. I don't know if it's Anita or Gary, but whichever it is, Anita, great. So I'm going to call you in just a moment, Anita. One thing I'd like people to think about and make some contributions about is what's in paragraph 18 of the statement, where we've said, through discussion and activity, we aim to promote the ideas of socialism or communism and to make them popular within the working class. And I just want everyone to think about what it would take for us to do that, to make our ideas, which clearly we all have an appetite for because we've been attending these discussion sessions, and what it would take for us to make them genuinely popular among the majority of people, the working class, and how we can go about doing that in the future. So I'm going to call Anita in to speak next.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, it's a good statement. I think I understand the necessity for it to be sort of very slimlined and where people can kind of collectively come together without it being over complicated. I think I understand that, and I would like to go along with that too. So the contribution I make is more sort of, thoughts that might be useful, might not be useful going forward. So I've had quite a lot of thinking, Will has said this before about reclaiming the word socialism from the Social Democrats or from the Labour Party or whatever. I think I've come to the conclusion that we should just abandon that word to the Social Democrats. They're doing a good job of abandoning it themselves, and I don't really think we need to kind of worry about sort of owning that word over them. I mean, you look at the Democratic Socialist Association in America. We're coming to the point, I think it feels like, where the social democratic parties around the world have, very emphatically come down on the side of capitalism and the crisis. What I'm more interested in is how we actually start owning the word communism. How do we take it and own it away from Stalinism? I think Matthew is right, actually. The history and our history, when I consider myself to be a Trotskyist, has always been about, differentiating ourselves from Stalinism, and somehow, for some reason, we've failed and they've survived. So my position is, let's own communism, and let's not confuse it, actually, in this statement between calling ourselves between socialists and communists. It's also actually about where do we look to build our ideas, which is what Ed was trying to say. And I'm coming to the point that we don't need to look to people who were Corbynites in the party, ex-Momentum people of the party. I think we need to look to the more people who are less organized, possibly, but in the trade unions or in the campaigns outside, actually, the Labour Party, or who left the Labour Party. So I'm kind of thinking, let's focus on communism and owning that. What does that mean for me? I think it's really interesting how the Chinese Communist Party does not want to drop the word communist. I went to a meeting where some of the kind of, it's a long story, but the impression I'm getting is actually the Chinese Communist Party wants to own the word communist, and it goes around the world saying that they're communists, and kind of playing on that role, that it's a communist party, and playing on the role of owning the legacy of Stalinism, I think. And so the kind of events that have opened up in West Africa and Niger suddenly bring forth the issues of anti-imperialism, neocolonialism, building states, nation states. Is Niger, combined and uneven development, or just purely uneven, completely undeveloped? Those kind of issues are coming up again. So we're talking about trying to also have the international dimension that Nick was talking about. And in that situation, I think it is incumbent on us to start owning the word communist, start taking on the fact that we're not Stalinist and differentiating ourselves from that. And I think the only way to do that for us is to own 1917, is to own the Bolshevik Revolution, and then differentiate ourselves of what went wrong there. So
I'm going to cut you off at that point, Anita, but it's that seems like a convenient point, but I think there's lots there that you could potentially expand on later as well, especially in terms of the international dimension. So thanks very much for that. So I've got Ian to speak next, but comrades, please keep raising your hands and I'll get you on the list to speak.
Good evening, comrades. It's really just ask a question, clarification really around point 17. A socialist communist party would seek to win both parliamentary and local council seats. Presumably this would have to be in alliance with other groups such as Tusk or whatever else. Anybody who's been in a local council seat or whatever, when you're discussing park benches and whatever else, yes, you can see the point where you can make a valuable contribution. So my particular interest in County Durham is that County Durham has historically been a pretty appalling employer towards its teaching assistants and others, and I would like to see a left of Labour challenge for council seats, and we're already seeing local councillors going independent because they can't tolerate the Labour Party anymore, but they're not necessarily socialists. But I think we also need to be careful about, well, do we take office in this context? I mean, it's all very well using it as a tribute. You can say, oh, I'm a councillor, so therefore I can make a speech at a local rally or some such. And that's fine. But also, my experience is that people generally don't vote for you unless you actually do stuff practically, because what they also want to make sure is they have their bloody paving stones fixed, or somebody sorts out the bloody parking. And actually, there are local issues like that in my own village. So let's be a little bit careful about that. I'm not opposed to it. I'm currently a parish councillor precisely because I intended to stand as an independent socialist with for County Durham, but not necessarily because I particularly wanted to be elected and administer paving stones, but because I wanted to be able to put a critical stance towards the Labour Party. But then the question is, the only way you're going to do that is really in alliance with people like Tusk or whoever else are standing, and that needs to be, I think, properly thought through. Because, you know, for example, if there was any possibility of some kind of alliance with the Communist Party of Britain, well, no, I've got nothing in common with them. So, you know, I think it's the sort of thing that we'll discuss and clarify over time. But that's really, I think, the point I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much for that, Ian. I think I can speak for myself and potentially others who wrote the statement as well, when I say that from my perspective, there's no principled reason why Marxists shouldn't all be united in a single organisation. But of course, it's simple enough to say that, and how you get there is another question. And of course, this statement is presented, I think, as a step forward along the road to the kind of mass communist or socialist party that we need, and all of the questions that you've raised, I'm sure, would need to be discussed in the meantime. So I'm going to call more comrades in to speak now. Steve, I can see that you've got home, so feel free to come in at any time if you want to raise your hand. And Kirsty has written in the chat, word communist shouldn't be used to describe China. They're a capitalist state, and they're the ones in big business now. Kirsty, if you want to come in and make a contribution, by all means, feel free. I'm going to call Matthew back in, but you know, please raise your hands, comrade, and I'll make sure that everyone gets a turn.
Right. Okay. Thanks, comrades. I think there's another. As briefly went through, and I think there's another 3 concepts which I think are essential to understand where we're at and what we do. The first of which actually is imperialism. Even if we take imperialism as defined by Lenin, obviously with some tweaks in terms of, you know, the development of what we exist in, which is essentially a US imperium, you know, because I say an imperial system controlled by the US, and which of course then slots in. I mean, the thing about imperialism, as Lenin outlines, it actually lines up very neatly with finance capital, and actually ties the two together. Because obviously what it means, of course, is you have a series, you know, you have obviously the imperialized countries in the world, which are then fed upon by means usually of finance capital and other things, and super exploitation. And you can't really understand how the system operates without understanding that concept. And of course, particularly, obviously, Britain, which is the oldest imperialist country, and the move to finance capital means that, in fact, of course, that the bulk of you know, Britain is actually held up by its imperialist operation, and particularly obviously the City of London, which sucks in money from the rest of the world and actually holds the whole thing up. So in those terms, you can't actually understand, you know, either on a world scale or a British scale what's going on without concept of imperialism and at least a, you know, something around that. I think the second thing that's important, you know, under the current circumstances, the role of the union bureaucracy. And what we're seeing now is quite a conscious move by the capitalist class in a very organized fashion, particularly in the US, but also, of course, here and elsewhere, to use the full-time apparatus of the unions against the membership of the unions. And we see this all the time now. That in fact what happens is the full-time apparatus actually has been pulled into work against its own people who technically pay for it, but in fact it actually operates, you know, in large part against them. And as I say, it's quite a conscious manoeuvre, and has been very, very successful. In terms, you know, obviously we've seen an upsurge of the working class struggle, but the means of control, the principal means of control of that has been union bureaucracy, and really we need to, you know, you need that, you know, to understand the role of that particular force, and of course how, you know, to develop how we deal with that thing, you know, in terms of its counterforce and whatever else. And the final thing I think, which is really important, is the question of the party, and what a real party would look like, and what it would do, and the effect it would have. Because we haven't had, I mean, in Britain in particular, I mean, Britain, even if you look at like the big, the Britain's never really had a major size of a revolutionary organisation of any sort. I mean, the Communist Party of Britain, which is the largest of all the parties, was always, even in the early Comintern, understood to be the worst in all of Europe. And it's not an accident that it was the British Communist Party that was used by Stalin to expel Trotsky, because it was actually from the Comintern, because it was so expendable and held in so low regard in any case.
I'm going to cut you off there, Matthew. I've let you make a provocative historical argument, and it's a perfect point to cut you off and leave it to ruffle some feathers. So thanks very much for that.
Okay, thanks.
Now I'm going to call in comrades in the following order: Pascal, then Gary, and then Steve Forrest.
Hi, sorry, I haven't been able to join many of the discussions just because life is quite busy, but I have been in previous discussions with people in the group, and I know several of you worked on campaigns with Will, Fill Empty Homes. I've worked with Nick, Soraya, Anita, Gary, so I'm sort of familiar with you all. But I really liked the paper, read the paper and document, and I think you've covered pretty much every aspect in terms of what we need to do to change society. And I think I really Nick ran a series of talks in Southwark actually, and they were really, really valuable in being the debate and discussing the theory and discussing what we need to do. And Ed, you were saying about those sorts of things, and I think maybe just there's quite a lot of points in the document, but maybe discussing some of the points within the document, from a Marxist perspective, would be a really good way of kind of getting the document further out to more people, and widening its exposure. But I think I really agree with what Anita said as well about and Matthew about the Stalinism. I really agree with that point, that we need to, because the bureaucracy has ruled the whole time, in the past 8 years when we had a chance to really come forward, that the bureaucracy has always won, the tightly controlled bureaucracy, even within the left. And I think the more democratic debate that's had is it's better, for people that really are on the brink of collapse. Like, we're okay, we're not rich here, but we're okay. But there are people that are really, really suffering, and yeah, it's only getting worse. It's not getting better. And I've got a generation of 4 kids to go forward. So, I remember people saying to me in the 80s, 90s, in 30 years time, it's only going to be worse. And if it's a circular process, isn't it, really? And we need to break that circular process. So yeah, I'm up for fighting. And I love the document. I think, I don't declare myself a Marxist, I say socialist. But yeah, why not say, I know you don't like attributing to one person, but people understand Marxism more than, or it's a more relatable term, Marxist, because it's deemed, I suppose, I'm a librarian, you can have Marxist books in my library. So I don't know. I know you don't like to attribute to one person, but there you go. That's just my thoughts, random ones.
Thanks very much, Pascal. I think you really hit the nail on the head by the need for a culture of debate and openness, which has been in such short supply and is and has been for a long time in such short supply on the left. And the left in this country in particular, there's very little culture of the debate of the kind that we're trying to foster in these discussion sessions. And so hopefully that will increase as time goes on, and we can play our part in that. I'm going to call in Gary and then Steve.
Thanks, Ed. So great introduction from Nick on sort of our vision, what we want to achieve, where we want to get to. And I think it's really important that we do put a lot of emphasis on that vision of wanting to create socialism or communism, what that means. I'm really fed up with much of the left insisting on talking about anti-capitalist movements and anti-capitalism as though there was something wrong or shameful about actually naming what we want to create rather than talking about what we don't like. I think it's important that we're positive about our vision for humanity and society. But Matthew did a really good job over a couple of contributions there. I found it really valuable, actually, sort of articulating the circumstances that we live in right now worldwide. We do have an appalling control by imperialism, but actually, interestingly, I mean, I think that whilst it's not weakening the control of imperialism, what we're seeing now is American imperialism being weakened a little bit, and there being more of a conflict between different poles of imperialism, China being the obvious competitor there, and that is putting us in grave risk of a world war, as we talked about in previous sessions here. We're talking about capitalism actually not having a Scooby how to solve its own economic crises, internationally nor domestically. And in the face of all of that, we have what? We have virtually nothing to stand against it. Organizationally, in terms of leadership, in terms of organized forces. And that's why I think this statement is so important, because we lack a political voice, we lack political leadership. There's a sense in which workers will always engage in class struggle because they have to. And in a sense, the class struggle will carry on and will carry on. It ebbs and flows. We've all got very excited about what's actually quite a modest increase in militant activity in the trade unions in the last 3 years. The trouble is that we're not offering any leadership into the working class movement, any leadership that offers real solutions rather than continual abject subjection to the capitalists. And we're in a situation where now even the Labour Party is not going to be putting social democracy on the ballot sheet in the next general election. Right? So we have an array of wooden Labour politicians saying nothing every time they get on TV. We all feel, I'm sure, a similar level of despair and frustration at the lack of any kind of fight going on, at the lack of any ideas being presented. And here I have to say something that's maybe a bit contentious, maybe seen as being a bit sectarian. But I think we also have to look at why we, as a small group of independents, need to be engaging in this activity, start initiating this statement and this talking shop. It's precisely because the organized Marxist left, I think, has never been weaker in my life in this country, right? And it's because the organized Marxist left has become almost an anachronism of itself. It has become wooden, it has become stale, it has become, well, certainly utterly undemocratic. It's a network of cliques, it's controlled by a few small number of personalities, and it is largely divorced from the working class movement. And so we are actually here trying to fill a huge vacuum in the working class movement with some ideas. We're beginning from virtually nothing, but there is so much that we can achieve, I hope. I think the statement does a really good job of doing an initial pitch of what we can share and how we can build. And yeah, I agree.
Cut you off there, Gary. Thanks very much. So I've got Steve and then Soraya with their hands raised to speak, but very keen to hear from those as well, others who haven't spoken yet. Janet and Minnie, always appreciate your contributions at these meetings. So by all means, raise your hand if there's something that you'd like to ask or chime in on. But for the moment, I'll call in Steve and then Soraya.
Thanks very much. So sorry to miss a little bit of that, just traveling back from work. So I think the first one is on the question of the label, which just seems to come up quite a bit. For me, I mean, perhaps I would call myself a Bolshevik, but you know, dating back to the 1903 Congress and everything else like that, and then stuff like that. I mean, but for me, it's just labels. I mean, it's an understanding, surely, of a belief, not a belief, but an understanding, and then of dialectical materialism and scientific socialism. And the labels have been painted by others over the years. You know, people would call themselves communists. I think it's quite interesting now that the socialist appeals have be taking an attempt to reclaim communism, whatever that means in that sense. So for me, I'm not sure to get, and Pascal, I'm not saying that you were, I'm just saying I'm not sure as a group or anybody discussing these ideas, it's a necessity to get bogged down in what we actually call ourselves. It's a belief in a society that isn't capitalist. It's a social society. Communism is a higher form of socialism, and I think part of the reason for this is that we don't discuss these ideas, these basic ideas, enough. To be honest, so I'm going to make some comments. I do not wish to drag the conversation in a completely different direction, and please don't allow it to go in that direction. Okay, and I'm not going to phrase it perhaps in the way that people may expect. I'm just going to pose it in the terms of questions to you all. Yeah. So I think firstly I'd like to say, and I know I've only got 3 minutes, but I'd quickly say that I think these meetings are excellent. The lack of sectarianism that all of us have shown, the lack of ego that we've all shown to create this friendly environment that, you know, we haven't all got a lot of outlets at the moment for discussing these ideas. And I think the organisers in particular should take a lot of credit for creating a excellent forum. But I'm not going to sort of do a, you know, restate any position or dig up a document. I'm just going to pose a question here, right? What you're proposing for yourselves, whatever, is a mammoth task. I get it. It's something that you feel is important. You feel is necessity. We've been under attack, and it's necessity to unfurl the banner, if you want to coin a phrase that we've used and heard in the past. But ultimately, I think the question that you have to ask yourselves, and I'm not saying anyone should get bogged down in Labour Party struggles. There's a lot of struggles in the unions, a lot of struggles in other areas of society. One comrade mentioned that he is a parish councillor, etc. Where will the working class go under a crisis Labour government? That's, for me, and I'm not going to dig up documents from 40 years ago and all this and everything else, right? Or whatever, how many years ago it is, 30 years ago, or restate positions, because that's not what your document says and it's not what your document asks for. But I think it really is quite important to address, where does the working class go under a crisis Labour government? Now, despite the fact I think that Starmer and his gang could throw away the next election quite easily, despite the opinion poll lead, let's say it's most likely there'll be a Labour government. When that Labour government attacks the working class, because it will be forced to do so, because it wants to, in a way that's its inevitable outlook, where will the working class go? After the defeat of Miliband, a section of the working class, although not massively, went into the Labour Party at that stage as a pole of attraction and for some, the natural place by which to seek an outlet for struggle. So all I'm doing is posing this as a question. It's not a question of me dictating some position I've held for 30 years, 40 years perhaps, which I still hold. But I'm just posing it in a way that I think is going to perhaps serve the meeting better, is where do we think the working class struggle will go? Yes, there's been some victims. I'll wrap up on this because time is short. We all usually get an hour plus translation at these events, but I think the real key point is, yes, there have been people that have been expelled. We all feel that, and not myself, but we all feel that the Labour Party's gone in a direction that we don't want it to go. But ultimately, that's potentially the leadership have took it and again today in a pro-Blairite direction. But ultimately, where will the working class go? If you believe that, and I'm not saying you guys, but if there is a belief that the working class will be attracted to an organisation, a party that declares itself purely communist, purely socialist, whatever label we want to put on it, scientific socialism, then that's an argument. But if it's that the working class will think, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to join the Labour Party, or naturally you're already affiliated through your unions, you become more active in it, and perhaps some socialists won't be where the activity of the class takes place at a lower level in order to raise them to the ideas of Marxism.
Thanks
I'm
a lot,
not
Steve.
stating that.
I'm going to cut you off for that.
That's fine.
I
That's
think
perfectly fine.
thanks, because it's an important dilemma, and how we intervene and position ourselves best to intervene in the struggles of the working class, and how the working class is going to be won to communism is a really important question, and it's something that undoubtedly there will be a lot of contention over, and a lot of debate and experimenting with finding the right approach. So no, it's an important point. So I've got Soraya to come in to speak next. Of course, I'm going to give Nick some time at the end of the discussion to come back and sum up and respond to various points that have been raised. So if I can see hands from anybody who's not come in yet and would like to make some contribution, even if only a brief one, you'd be more than welcome, and we will definitely manage to fit you all in before I bring Nick back in. So I'm going to bring Soraya in now.
Both Pascal and Steve have spoken about the, in a way, the Labour Party, and I think it's really crucial. We've had discussions before about the nature of the Labour Party. It never has been a socialist party, and it's never had the aim, despite what there might have been. It's not been anything other than a limb of social democracy at its best. That doesn't mean that with this statement we are proclaiming that we are the Communist Party or the Socialist Party. It's really to set out that that's what's needed and how we can play a part in building that. And the fact that we saw the debacle of Corbyn, it wasn't really, Pascal said that the bureaucracy has won. It's really more the nature of the majority of people who are MPs in the Labour Party and councillors and so on. And that's why I refer back to the nature of the Labour Party, that their aspirations are not to get rid of capitalism, but rather to try to control it and to remain within the confines of capitalism, as if there's a possibility of reform. And I think now more than ever before, that's not possible. And it's really the reason. Another comrade spoke about the ebb and flow of struggles. It's essentially, isn't it, because the leaders of the unions and the Labour Party in its entirety fail utterly to provide a solution to those problems. That's why there is a need to proclaim that communism is necessary, and that we need a party that fights for that, because everywhere those who call themselves Marxists or on the left or whatever, I think it's probably a sweeping statement, but generally have succumbed to the onslaught, the ideological onslaught of capitalism, and have the ideology, and so they focus on single issue campaigns as though that is the answer. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't carry on campaigns to defend our jobs ourselves, the NHS, public education, but we mustn't, whilst doing that, fail to explain that in fact it's part of a longer battle, and that anything we can secure and hold on to is not going to last, because it will be always, as history shows us, constantly under attack. And the tension between the demands of workers and the successes that workers have achieved, and capitalism wanting to claw those back, So I think, yes, it's right. There's a question, where will workers go under a crisis Labour government, a Labour government that's carrying out the attacks on, sorry, I'm coming to a close now, the attacks on the very workers they're supposed to be representing? Well, there's a really strong risk. Again, this emphasises for me the need to, however few we are, but the need to carry on the slog of presenting the statement and arguing that we need to get rid of capitalism altogether, because there's a very strong risk, isn't there, that people will go, not en masse, hopefully at this stage, but to far right ideas. And so that's another reason why when we look at what's happened around the world, it's astonishing that for me, I lived in Italy for many years and was in the Communist Party there, the Italian Communist Party. The idea that you could have Meloni as Prime Minister is absolutely hair-raising, but that's what happens when no alternative solution is provided.
Thanks very much, Soraya. I'm going to prioritise those comrades who haven't spoken yet. So Ian, I can see you've got your hand raised, and I think we will make time for you to come back in. But before I call you, I'm going to call Minnie and then Janet. So if we could have Minnie.
Hi, yeah. I think, yeah, it's a good statement, but I think whatever statement we put out has to be has to cut through, and it has to have it has to define what you mean by Marxism, and it doesn't need to come across as, I don't think us working class should be put off by thinking, well, we've got to go to school, we've got to learn all this Marxism, we've got to learn all about everything. And you can really simplify it and get the simple, the basics of Marxism across: alienation, social relations, ownership of production, common ownership, finance capital, all those things. I read today that 8 men have as much wealth as 3.6 billion, which is half the world's population. So the whole working class, I saw a comment on the website, the working class knows what's wrong. We all know what's wrong. And we need we need to cut through with practical ideas, basics on obviously sorting out what you're going to call yourself, we're up against the media, getting the message out, cliques, obviously. So I just think there are a lot of people out there that are suffering. So it's just, they haven't got time to listen and to debate and all that. We need to really cut through. That's all I want to say, really. It's got to cut through. And it's got to say, they're killing us. We need to get together now. They're killing the planet. Us working class, we need to all get together. We've got to solve this, and we've got to do it now. It's urgent. It really is urgent. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Minnie. So I've got Janet to speak next.
Okay. I think Steve's question was very pertinent. And I guess I don't entirely go with what he's saying about, I think you're not just saying, Steve, that there will be something happening, but you want to see it happening in a certain way. And I think I agree with Soraya about that. And just going back to what Gary was saying about the left, the Marxist left or socialist left. Yeah, I mean, I've been, just out of interest, looking at quite a lot of these groups with dismay, really, actually. But, what happens if if there is a Labour government, if it will deliver and perform like we all think it's going to? I think there's a kind of halfway house, really, between maybe what Steve's saying, but also what Soraya's saying about the danger of the far right. And clearly there is. If things get much worse and people's expectations, even if they're low, they're going to be smashed. And if things do get worse for a lot of people, there is that danger. But I think the other danger is about the kind of degeneration of parts of what they would call themselves the real left, I don't know, and socialists, and that there are quite a lot of people who are saying that, you know, that it's not about class anymore, and it's not about left versus right. It's about issues like freedom of speech, and going on to very marginal ones around, you know, trans issues and so on. And I think I mentioned George Galloway before, because I think he fascinates me, really. He gets 6,000 people twice a week on his moats rubbish. I mustn't say that, his moats, whatever. And I think maybe it's just the people who comment, you know, are frightening, and 5,800 don't comment and they're okay. But he's getting speakers there that are actually extreme right-wing conspiracy theorists, and the comments, a lot of the comments are actually anti-immigration. They never ever mention the economy, they never mention class at all, but they're populist. I mean, they're coming through with a kind of populist, not left, not right, but about the people. And I think there is a danger. He's clearly attracting, and obviously he's still a tiny nothing in a large universe, but there is an attraction to that. If you look at American politics, the kind of joining up of the you know, Tucker, what's his name, and some of the left, really because of Ukraine, but actually there are some elements of what's going on here there as well. And I think that's quite frightening, really, because whatever happens, we don't want that to be where people disillusioned with a Labour government, if there is one, start going to. That's it.
Thanks very much, Janet. So I'm going to call Ian back in, and then Will, and then that will be it for the discussion. So go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, thank you. If you sit down with anyone for any length of time and explain what socialism is, as opposed to what they think it is, or it's not, you know, not the Labour Party, not the Soviet Union, and so on, no one's actually against it. They just don't think it's possible, either because it goes against human nature, or it's just physically impossible. It would be such a bloodbath, they won't let us do it. So, but as Nick has pointed out in the past, it's a bloodbath anyway. I mean, the only question is, you know, capitalism is declining and will eventually be superseded. The question is by what? I agree with Soraya that there is a real danger of a right-wing populist authoritarian type movement. And it might even be a right-wing populist authoritarian type movement using a socialistic phraseology, and we should be prepared for that. The other thing I wanted to say was, I think any group like this should be quite serious about doing theory. This is volume 3 of Lenin's collected works. It's 632 pages, and it's the development of capitalism in Russia. Say what you like about Vladimir Ilyich, he actually sat down and did his homework. And I think his understanding of the nature of the Soviet Union was central to his ability to organize the Bolshevik Party. Having said all of that, I think we absolutely must not, under any circumstances, treat the works of Lenin, Marx, Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg, you can put in the pantheon who you like, as works of scripture. And they must be subjected to criticism, they must be read avidly, but also then we don't leave the ground open to Thomas Piketty, for example, to try and explain the nature of contemporary capitalism. I mean, you know, where are the Ernest Mandels of today? You know, at least there was an attempt there to try and push Marxist thought further. So it's not because I want to get involved in arcane disputes or just or kind of scholasticism, but because I think theory is a way in which we stop ourselves making fools of ourselves, as has happened so many times in the past. That was really all I wanted to add. One other little thing. In paragraph 3, where there's a lot of talk about extending the working day and cutting wages instead of utilising technology to reduce hours and so on, I don't disagree with that. But of course, you know, remember, Trotsky thought there would be a revolution after World War II, and what we actually saw was decades of unprecedented prosperity in the imperialist countries. And understanding that kind of thing and understanding where we are is going to be a central theme. I think, if nothing else, this group needs to be talking about that sort of thing as a spur towards theoretical development as well.
Thanks very much, Ian. So finally, contribution from Will, and then I'll hand back over to Nick. You're on mute, Will.
Apologies, I was just saying we were short on time, so 2 quick points. The first one is I agree. I think it was Janet was making the point about the far right, and it is getting really, really worrying, actually. I mean, if you look at the news about what's going on in Poland today and who they've selected, I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy who's been selected to represent the governing party is clearly an anti-Semite and has made anti-Semitic statements and is, you know, backing off from all of it, but is clearly a very dangerous person. So that is massively concerning. The stuff about Galloway and his channel and this kind of right populism is really concerning, which underlines why the revolutionary left and communists and socialists need to get their act together, in my view. The second point I would make is just without going too much off into that debate about the Labour Party, my thought is that I don't think that we know the answer to your question, Steve. But in the sense that I think part of it might be that part of the working class might go back to Labour, yeah. Part of it might fight Labour. Part of it might go into the trade unions to carry out a militant fight. There might be a differentiation in what the working class does in regard to that. And I think one of the reasons why that differentiation might be more profound now than it has been in the past is because Corbynism was an interruption of a process that began in 1976 with the IMF bailout for Labour. And Labour, since that period, has been moving further and further and further to the right. I personally think that's connected to the decline of an imperial power. And I think it is not impossible to suggest that something qualitative might be happening to the Labour Party in the next period, which will drive workers away from it. But having said all that, I've always wondered why it wasn't possible. And I'm not thinking of any particular group, because I was in one group that did this and I know other people within another group. Why was it never possible for us to say, okay, our class is differentiating, right? They want to fight the class struggle, but they're differentiating about where they want to fight it, yeah? And why were we not able to contain that in one organisation? Why did organisations have to split over that? And I think that's a question that we've really got to get our heads around and think about, especially in the next period.
Thanks very much, Will. And thank you to everyone who contributed. There were so many points raised in that discussion that I think it really bodes well for our future discussions and our future collaboration together, because, of course, the statement is an invitation to collaborate as much as anything else. So I'm going to hand over to Nick now and give Nick 10 minutes to respond to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Ed, and thank you very much to everybody that contributed. Once again, we've had a really rich discussion, and each contribution could be the basis for a discussion of an hour and a half or even a whole day and more. So I just want to go back, because a lot of the questions have really, raised issues about the statement and what we're trying to do. And I just want to recapitulate in a sense before I take up some specific points. There's a lot of retreat amongst the left, including the Marxist left. We see that in many who in Britain at the moment call themselves Marxists, but are following what's termed broad partyism, basically lowering their Marxist ideas, their socialism or communism, and falling behind what are really left-wing social democratic ideas. So that's one thing that we're seeing. We also have this bedeviling issue of the atomization of the left and the splitting of the left. So our response to that, or those points and others, has been to try to put forward a statement which creates the parameters, perhaps the outlines for agreement amongst Marxists, saying, yes, we agree with this, and that's a basis for joint work. And everything else is up for discussion. And a lot of the things that have been raised in this discussion are down to interpretations of theory, which are points for discussion, debate, further investigation, which some organizations on the left do not allow because they have a line. They have a line on theory. Sometimes that gets in the way of uniting with other Marxists who might have a different perspective, a different point of view, a different way of understanding things. And there's also the question of tactics, which to my mind should not really lead to differences amongst Marxists to the extent that they're in different organizations. So Ian raised a very important question for me about paragraph 18, I think, no, I can't remember which paragraph it was now, about standing in elections. Was it 17? Yeah, paragraph 17, standing in elections. This was essentially making a general point about the fact that Marxists cannot abandon democratic struggle and participating in the democratic conduits or the democratic institutions and forms that we currently have, because they are an important way of getting our ideas across. When we do it, how we do it, with whom we do it, they're all tactical issues. And I certainly have disagreements with the way that the Socialist Party and Tusk present themselves in their elections. I don't think they're anything like as clear and as strong and as strident and as bold as they need to be on the question of socialism / communism. But those are tactical issues which we really want to discuss with everybody else on the left about how we stand, when we stand, who we stand. Those are tactical issues, but we've put in the document the importance of presenting ourselves. We shouldn't forget, for example, that the Paris Commune arose out of participation and development of struggle in an electoral aspect of bourgeois democracy that arose out of struggles in the late 18th and 19th century. And yet we look to the Paris Commune, and Marx looked to the Paris Commune. These things are extremely important. Poplar dispute, Labour Party council under George Lansbury, who essentially went to prison for refusing to implement bourgeois taxation. So all of these things have their place. But what we've tried to do, as Will said, is strip back in the statement. And it may seem dry. I think that may be Minnie's point. It may not be, it may be a bit dry, a bit too arid, but it's basically trying to delineate where we're coming from, and that sets the basis. So we all agree here with Ian that theory is absolutely key. It's important. We need to make it accessible. We need to make it put it across in a way that everybody can understand. And theory and the principles that we outline in our statement essentially are the bedrock upon which we're going to build. And it's not surprising that we all may feel overawed or overcome by the, was it Steve's point, the mammoth task that faces us. But however big that task is, it's got to be confronted, it's got to be tackled, it's got to be wrestled with, and it's got to be overcome, because otherwise, we can all go with Garibaldi and dig up potatoes, but even Garibaldi was called back. We, in a sense, I've used this this phrase before, and I got it wrong the last time, but we can look at ourselves as being blessed or cursed, because we understand that something has to be done, and we can say that we're cursed because it condemns us to committing ourselves to this mammoth task, or we're blessed because we think that we have the ideas and we want to take them to the working class. And that means finding allies, as I said before. Every single one of the contributions that have been made in this discussion could be an excellent article without much tinkering, without any tinkering, could be an excellent article on the website, because they all add to the discussion about what we need to do. So I just want to go through a couple of points. I think I've got 3 or 4 minutes left. Stalinism, I agree with the points that have been made, the pernicious role, and continues to play. And there is a strange paradox that even though the Soviet Union collapsed and was as essentially capitalism is now rife in Russia, the pernicious theory of socialism in one country has gained a sort of lease of life in Britain, which seems extremely strange. But the Morning Star essentially is the paper, the bag carrier for the left trade union bureaucracy, and it needs to be challenged. We need to find a way to develop our own media to challenge these ideas of, you know, socialism being somehow Jeremy Corbynism, or the trade union left, which in Unite have, you know, voted last year for more money to be spent on the arms industry and so on. We have to challenge those ideas, and that means we have to find ways to put your contributions, our ideas, into podcasts, into articles. We need to have a radio station. We need to have more material on YouTube that people can go to and find, because the danger is, as Soraya and others have referred to, the ideas of the populist far right, the sort of red-brown alliance of Galloway and others, the danger is that those ideas gain the ear of the working class. If you look at Italy and France, those belts of working class living that once voted overwhelmingly for the Communist Party, despite its Stalinist perversions, put that to one side for the moment, those now vote overwhelmingly for Le Pen, or for the far right, the fascists, the neo-fascists in Italy. And the phraseology, I mean, some of you may have come across this looking at the question of what's going on in Niger and Gabon. But there are some videos of Meloni, the neo-fascist prime minister of Italy, berating Macron. And when you listen to it, you think, wow, this is quite strident, this is very forceful, this is quite left-wing. And then she comes to the point of her rhetoric, which is to condemn Macron and French imperialism in West Africa for creating the conditions in which we have mass migration or refugees, and that's the problem for her. And so we see how the danger of the rhetoric being used by people who got nothing in common with us. In the 1920s and the 1930s, when we had an international crisis, economically, socially, democratically, and so on, we had a division where one section, primarily the middle class, flooded to the fascists in Germany and in Italy, and the working class sections of it, the most advanced sections of it, went to the communists. And at that stage, we had the edifice of the Soviet Union and the Bolshevik Revolution, which Anita referred to. But now we don't have that. We have the defeat of the 1917 revolution. And that's how people see it. The idea that there is no alternative. So faced with the crises of capitalism, Matthew went into them in some detail, we've summarized them in the statement. When people experience these crises, they're looking for answers, and the far right may get an echo because the left, the communist socialist left, is not strong enough. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to create that pole of attraction. I think, unless Ed gives me any more time, the question of the name, I agree with in one sense, it's not important, but that's why we haven't come down on one or the other. We want to use both. I think both should be reclaimed. Communism for the reasons that have been outlined, socialism. I mean, even Steve himself used the term scientific socialism. Marx and Engels talked about scientific socialism. Engels wrote a fantastic pamphlet, Socialism, Utopian or Scientific or unscientific. So both words are there. It's the ideas, it's the vision of the new society that will inspire people. We have to do what we can to ensure that those ideas are presented in an accessible way to the working class and draw people to those ideas. I ask you to participate with us, to join us and help us build those ideas in a way that can be taken up by workers in all aspects of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick, for the excellent introduction and summation of the discussion there. And thank you to everyone else who contributed this evening. To those who joined tonight and didn't want to speak or say anything on this occasion, really hope you enjoyed the discussion and got something out of it, and I hope that we'll see you again at the next one as well. Please do look out for the recording of this discussion. It's going to be on our YouTube channel, which I'll post a link to in the chat now. Of course, it's under the name Talking About Socialism. And of course, our website is a great resource of all kinds of articles dealing with the topics that we discuss as well. And that's at talkingaboutsocialism.org. Feel free to share the recording of this discussion once it goes up with anybody who you think might be interested or who couldn't make it tonight. The next discussion in these sessions will be in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to be introducing that discussion, and it's going to be on the issue of democracy. I'm going to try and explore what democracy is and isn't, what meaning it has for the ways in which communists organise ourselves, and for the type of new society that we're fighting for. I'm going to invite people to think about the democracy that we have right now and the democracy that we need in the society to come. So with that, I'm going to close the meeting and thank everyone once again, and hope very much to see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you all.